moment I found the Easter card my daughter-in-law had hidden in the kitchen drawer, I understood why my son hadn't visited in 8 months. Let me back up. My name is Leonard Kowalski. I'm 67 years old, retired electrician, 31 years with the same union local out of Columbus, Ohio. I've got 2 bad knees, a decent pension, and a house on Fieldstone Drive that my wife Carol and I bought in 1989 for $94,000. She passed 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the last morning, I held her hand in the hospice room on the 3rd floor of Mount Carmel East. I still can't drive past that building without feeling it in my chest. We had 3 kids. My oldest, Stephen, is 42. He married a woman named Adrian about 6 years ago. They live 20 minutes away in Ghana. My middle one, Patrice, is 39. She teaches high school English and has 2 boys, Owen and Sam, 9 and 11. She married a good man named Bruce. They're in Westerville. And then there's my youngest, Daniel. He's 34. Landscape architect. Never married, lives downtown in a nice apartment, has a dog named Pepper that Carol would have absolutely loved. After Carol died, I did what most men my age do in that situation. I kept moving. I showed up. Christmas was at my house. Easter was at my house. 4th of July, Thanksgiving, every birthday I could manage. I was there. I cooked everything Carol used to cook, badly at first, then better. I took notes. I called Patrice and asked her how her mother made the pierogi filling. I watched videos on YouTube at 11 o'clock at night to figure out how to get the roast the way Carol did it, that low and slow method she never wrote down anywhere. I wasn't trying to replace Carol. Nothing could do that. I was trying to keep something alive. Some thread between all of us and the woman who had held us together for 38 years. I thought I was doing okay. This past Easter, I started planning 6 weeks out. I know that sounds like a lot, but cooking for 15 people, including 6 grandchildren under 12, takes real preparation. I budgeted $380 for the whole meal. Ham, lamb chops for the adults who wanted them, the pierogi, 3 desserts, colored eggs for the kids. That's nearly 1/7 of my monthly income. My pension and Social Security together come out to about $2,650 a month. I manage fine, but $380 and $650 a month. I manage fine, but $380 is not nothing. I made my shopping list in February. I confirmed with all 3 kids by early March. Stephen and Adrian were coming with their daughter Emma, 5 years old. Patrice and Bruce with Owen and Sam. Daniel with Pepper, who I told him 100 times couldn't come inside but always ended up inside anyway. 15 people total, not counting the dog. The week before Easter, I cleaned the house from top to bottom, cut the good tablecloth out of the cedar chest, the one Carol's mother had given us as a wedding gift, set the dining room table with the china we only used on holidays, put fresh tulips in a vase in the center. Carol always did tulips at Easter, never lilies. She thought lilies smelled like a funeral home. Good Friday afternoon, I started on the pierogi dough. That's the one dish that takes the longest, and I was finally getting it right after 4 years of trial and error. I had Carol's handwriting on an index card propped up against the flour canister. Her S's curled in a way that still made something in me catch. That's when I heard the notification from the family group chat on my phone. I wiped my hands and picked it up, expecting a question about what time to arrive or whether to bring anything. What I found instead was a message in a chat I had never seen. A chat called Just the 3 with the little green icon. Stephen, Patrice, and Daniel. No Leonard. I had been accidentally included. Daniel later told me he'd meant to forward something to me and his thumb had slipped, adding me to the thread instead. I almost put the phone down. I wish I had, but I scrolled up. Not just a few messages, weeks of them. March 8th. Stephen, anyone else dreading Easter? Adrian's parents are doing a thing in Hilton Head. Way more appealing than Dad's house, honestly. Patrice, don't say that out loud. You know how he gets. He's been texting me about the pierogi since February. Daniel, he texted me twice this week asking if Pepper was up to date on vaccines for an outdoor dog visit. He's getting worse since Mom. Stephen, I know. It's a lot. Adrian thinks we need to start managing his expectations, like gently suggest he doesn't have to host everything. Patrice, every time I try to bring that up, he tears up a little and then I feel like a monster. Daniel, he doesn't have other people. That's the problem. All he has is us. I stood in my kitchen reading this while the doll rested on the counter. Stephen, March 19th. Adrian really wants to do Hilton Head. Her parents rented a place. There's a pool for Emma. I'm trying to figure out how to get out of Easter without a whole thing. Patrice, I'm not covering for you. I can't keep being the one who shows up. Daniel, relax. Tell him something came up with work. He never pushes back on work stuff. Stephen, true. Okay, I'll handle it. Patrice, you guys, I feel bad. He's going to have all that food. Daniel, he'll be fine. He survived worse. Stephen, exactly. And honestly, maybe it's better if he gets used to us not being there every single time. He needs to get a life that doesn't revolve around our schedules. He needs to get a life. I read that 3 times. My son. The boy I coached in Pee-wee football. The one I drove to the ER at 2 in the morning when he broke his collarbone falling off a roof at 17. He needs to get a life. April 2nd, 5 days before Easter. Patrice. So what's the plan? Stephen, I'm going to tell him Adrian's mom had a health scare and we need to be with her family. It's not that far from true. She has been having some knee stuff. Daniel, I'm going to say work. I have a site visit I can reschedule, but he doesn't need to know that. Patrice, I can't lie to him. Stephen, you don't have to lie to him. Stephen, you don't have to lie. Just say the boys have a conflict. Patrice, they don't have a conflict. Daniel, Patrice, come on. Long pause in the timestamps. Then Patrice, fine. But I'm telling him we'll do a make-up dinner. I'm not just leaving him with nothing. Stephen, of course. Next weekend or whatever. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. I set my phone on the counter next to Carol's index card with her curled handwriting, and I looked at the pierogi dough and the tulips I'd bought the day before, and the 15-place settings I hadn't put out yet, but had been planning to set the next morning. I'm not a man who cries easily. Didn't cry at my own father's funeral. Did cry at Carol's, quietly, with my hand over my mouth in the front pew. Did not cry now. What I felt instead was something colder and slower than tears. Something that had been building for 4 years and had just found a name. I stood at the kitchen sink and looked out at the backyard, at the oak tree that Stephen and Daniel had climbed 1,000 times as kids, at the flower bed where Carol used to grow her zinnias, at the old rope swing I kept meaning to take down. Then I heard Carol's voice. Not literally, not in a mystical way, just the thing in my memory that knew her best. She would have said, Leonard, stop feeling sorry for yourself and decide what you're going to do. I decided. I did not cancel Easter. I did not cancel Easter. I finished the pierogi dough, wrapped it in plastic, put it in the refrigerator. I went to bed and I lay there for a long time looking at the ceiling, and by the time I fell asleep, I had a plan. Saturday, I woke up early. I made coffee and I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Father Jim at St. Anthony's, where Carol and I had been members for 32 years. I explained that I'd be hosting Easter dinner for anyone who might otherwise be spending the day alone, and asked if he knew of anyone in the parish who fit that description. He was quiet for a moment, then said, Leonard, I can think of at least 6 people off the top of my head. Let me make some calls. The second call was to my neighbor Dolores, 74, who'd lost her husband 2 years ago and who I'd noticed eating alone through her kitchen window more times than I could count. I asked her if she'd like to come for Easter dinner. She said, Oh, Leonard, I haven't had a real Easter dinner since Harvey passed. Her voice sounded like she was trying not to shake. What can I bring? I told her just herself. By Saturday afternoon, I had 11 people coming. A man from church named Bernard, 70, a retired postal worker whose daughter lived in Phoenix and hadn't been back since Christmas 2 years ago. A young woman named Yolanda who was a nursing student working the holiday weekend but had the morning free. Father Jim said she'd been eating vending machine sandwiches most days. A couple who'd recently relocated from Puerto Rico, Eduardo and Rosa, still finding their footing in Ohio winters, no family nearby. A Vietnam veteran named Lloyd, 75, who lived alone in a house 3 blocks over and who I'd only ever waved to from my driveway. A college kid from down the street, 19 years old, name of Tanner, whose parents were going through a divorce and who told Dolores he wasn't going anywhere for Easter, and 4 others from the parish, all older, all alone. I bought more ham, got 2 extra pounds of potatoes, made a third pie. Easter Sunday morning, my 3 children texted. Right on schedule. Stephen first. Dad, I'm so sorry. Adrian's mom took a fall yesterday. Nothing too serious, but we really should be with her family. I know you'll understand. We'll make it up to you. Then Daniel. Hey, Pop. Site visit got moved and I have to be there by noon. I'm really sorry. Can we do something next week? Then Patrice and hers took longer to come, and I could tell she'd rewritten it a few times. Dad, I'm so sorry. Owen has had a low-grade fever since Thursday, and I don't want to bring it into your house. I'll make this up to you, I promise. I love you. I texted back the same thing to each of them. I understand. Don't worry about it. That was all. By 11 o'clock, my house was full. Dolores arrived first with a bottle of Lambrusco and her late husband Harvey's deviled egg recipe on a piece of paper she clearly found by going through her recipe box that morning. Lloyd showed up in a pressed button-down shirt, holding a store-bought coffee cake with both hands, standing very straight. Bernard brought a bag of Werther's candies for the table, which made me like him immediately. Eduardo and Rosa came with a container of tembleque they'd made, a Puerto Rican coconut pudding that I'd never had before, and that turned out to be one of the best things I'd eaten in years. Tanner arrived last, a little unsure of himself, and Dolores immediately handed him a job peeling potatoes, which settled him right down. We sat down to eat at noon. 12 of us around a table that had been set for 15. I said grace the way Carol always had, the short version she liked. Lord, thank you for this meal and for these people. May we always know when we are needed and show up. I don't know why I added that last part. It just came out. The food was good, really good. Bernard had thirds of the pierogi. Rosa cried a little when she tasted the ham, said it reminded her of her mother's house in Ponce. Lloyd ate quietly and steadily, and at the end of the meal looked at me and said, Kowalski, this was the best Easter I've had in 10 years. I mean that. He said it the way men of his generation say things they mean, plainly, without decoration. I'm going to tell you something now, and I want you to take a moment with it, because it surprised me at the time, and it still does. Sitting at that table with 12 people I barely knew, watching Tanner help Dolores refill the water glasses, watching Eduardo describe the coconut pudding to Bernard in careful English, while Rosa added details in Spanish, and everyone nodded along. I felt more like myself than I had at any family holiday in 4 years. Not because my kids weren't there, because I wasn't waiting for anything. I want to tell you, before we go further, leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. It genuinely helps to know someone is out there. That afternoon, after my guests left, each one with a container of leftovers, each one with a hug or a handshake, or in Lloyd's case, a single firm nod that felt like both, I cleaned up alone and sat at the kitchen table with my coffee. My phone was quiet until 4047 p.m. That was when Patrice called. I answered. Dad. Her voice was tight. Did you post something on Facebook? I had, actually. Saturday evening, I'd posted on our neighborhood Facebook group, Fieldstone Area Neighbors. Just a simple thing. Retired widower here. Made too much food for Easter. Anyone spending the day alone is welcome at my table. 11 a.m. Just bring yourself. I'd gotten 15 replies. Only 12 people had come, but 15 had replied. I posted in the neighborhood group, I said. Why? Dad, Gail Morrison shared it, and then Linda Petrakis shared it. It's been shared like 60 times. There's a local blog thing. Thistle Columbus, they wrote a little piece about it. About you. I hadn't known about the blog. It says you were alone for Easter. Patrice said. It says your family had other plans. I didn't say anything. Dad. Her voice had changed. We had no idea. I mean, Owen's fever was real. I really didn't want to. She stopped. Stephen called me. He saw it. He's upset. Is he? I said. Dad, please. Can we come over? I'm going to bed early, I said. Come tomorrow. I'm going to bed early, I said. Come tomorrow if you want to talk. I slept fine. Better than fine. They all came the next day. Easter Monday. Stephen and Adrian arrived first. Then Patrice and Bruce, without the boys, which told me they'd arranged it that way on purpose. Daniel last, with Pepper, who I let come inside without saying a word about it. We stood in the living room. Carol's photo was on the shelf above the fireplace, where it always is. Stephen started, because Stephen always starts. Dad, we owe you an apology. A big one. What we did was wrong, and we're sorry. Which part? I said. He blinked. All of it? I need you to be specific, I said. Was it planning to bail on Easter 2 weeks before it happened? Or calling me a burden in your group chat? Or the lying about the reasons? I'd like to know which part you're apologizing for. The room got very quiet. Adrian looked at the floor. Daniel looked at me with something I can only describe as relief, like he'd been waiting for this to happen and was glad it finally had. Patrice's eyes had filled. You were in the chat? Stephen asked. Daniel added me by mistake, I said. I read everything, back to early March. Dad, Patrice said. I said I felt bad. I said I didn't want to. You went along with it, I said, and I kept my voice level because I had decided I wasn't going to yell. You felt bad and you went along with it. You told your brothers you couldn't lie to me, and then you lied to me. I know the difference between feeling bad and doing the right thing. Your mother knew that difference. I'm asking you to learn it. Nobody said anything. I had some things to tell them. I told them slowly, and I meant all of it. I was selling the house. I had already talked to a realtor. The house was listed in my head as probably worth somewhere between $280,000 and $310,000. Modest by some standards, but it was paid off and it was mine. I had found a place I wanted to look at more seriously. A 55-plus active community in Upper Arlington called Arborside. Not a nursing home. Not assisted living. A real neighborhood with its own gym, its own walking trails, a community garden, a calendar full of things to do. I'd been on a wait list without telling them. Dad, this is the family home, Adrian said, and then seemed to realize immediately it was not the right moment for her to speak. It's my home, I said, not unkindly, and I've decided I'd rather have a community than a building. I also told them I'd updated my will. I'd done this quietly, the Friday before Easter, at the office of an attorney named Weiss on North High Street who'd handled Carol's estate. I told them the breakdown. The house proceeds and my savings, totaling somewhere around $340,000, depending on the sale, plus my life insurance. A substantial portion was going to St. Anthony's Food Pantry, which served about 400 families a week in our neighborhood. A portion was going to establish a small scholarship at Columbus State in Carol's name for students pursuing education degrees. She'd always wanted to be a teacher, but had put it aside when the kids came, and she never stopped wishing she'd done it. The rest, after legal and administrative costs, was divided in a way that left each of my children a meaningful but modest amount. Not nothing, but not the expectation they might have had. You can contest it if you want, I said. That's your right, but it's what I've decided. Stephen opened his mouth, closed it. He was the one thinking about money. I could see it. He's always been practical that way, which I generally respect, but not today. Daniel spoke instead. I think you're right, Pop, he said quietly. I'm sorry. I should have said something in that chat. I should have said stop. I didn't. That landed harder than anything else, actually, because he was right, and because I knew he knew it. Patrice crossed the room and hugged me. I let her. She cried into my shoulder, and I patted her back and didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything useful left to say. I'm not cutting you out of my life, I told them, when everyone had settled somewhat. That's not what this is. But I'm done arranging my life around your availability and hoping you'll show up. I'm going to build something for myself. And if you want to be part of it, I genuinely like that. But it has to be because you want to be there, not out of guilt. Not because of what I might leave you, because you actually want to know me. They left after a while, not badly, not slamming doors or anything like that. More like people who had a lot to think about and needed to go home to do it. I moved to Arborside in August, got a 2-bedroom unit with a little balcony overlooking the garden, brought Carol's photo, her kitchen things, her cedar chest, left a lot of the furniture with Patrice, who was grateful for it. The house sold in 11 days for $298,000, more than the low estimate. Dolores and I had coffee twice before I moved. On the second visit, she told me Harvey had loved Easter too and that the holiday had been terrible for her since he died. And I said I understood that. And we sat with it for a minute, the way you can sit with something when you're both old enough to know that some things don't need a response. Just company. At Arborside, I met a man named Ed, a retired school teacher from Clintonville, 69, who played chess badly but enthusiastically and who had opinions about Ohio State football that were aggressively incorrect but delivered with such conviction that I found it delightful. I met a woman named June Patton, 71, who ran the community garden and who put me to work planting tomatoes within 2 weeks of my arrival. I joined a woodworking class on Thursday evenings. I made a lopsided cutting board that I gave to Daniel, who hung it on his kitchen wall, which is the right thing to do with a lopsided cutting board given to you by your father. My children tried, I'll say that fairly. Stephen came by in September, alone, without Adrian, which surprised me. We walked the trail around the property. He said, "Dad, I've been thinking about what you said, about wanting to know you. I don't think I've done a very good job of that since Mom." I told him I thought he was right, and that there was still time if he wanted to use it. We didn't hug. We're not huggers, Stephen and I, but we walked the whole loop twice, and by the second time around he was asking me questions about my father, his grandfather, things he'd never asked before. I talked for 45 minutes. He listened. Patrice started calling on Sunday evenings. Not every Sunday, but most. We'd talk about her students, about the boys, about whatever book she was reading. One evening she said, out of nowhere, "Mom would have done exactly what you did at Easter." I said, "I hope so." She said, "I know so." We were both quiet for a little while after that. Daniel brought Pepper to Arborside 3 times before someone in management noticed, and I had to have an awkward conversation. After that, he came alone. We started going to Columbus Clippers games together. Minor league baseball the way we used to when he was in his 20s. Cheap seats, bad hot dogs, good evenings. This past Easter, a full year after the one that changed things, my kids came to Arborside. All 3 of them, all of their families, right on time, no excuses. They brought food. Adrian made a green bean casserole that was genuinely excellent, and I told her so. Owen and Sam ran around the community garden with 2 other kids from my floor. Emma, my granddaughter, found the corner of the common room with all the board games and organized an entire tournament that nobody had agreed to but everyone participated in. Dolores came. Ed came. June Patton brought her daughter who was visiting from Cincinnati. Lloyd drove over from Fieldstone Drive, still in a pressed shirt, still standing very straight. We were 18 people around 3 tables pushed together. Before we ate, Patrice asked if she could say grace. That was new. She kept it short. "Thank you for this food and for this year. Thank you for teaching us even when we didn't want to be taught. Amen." My grandkids said amen with their eyes still open, the way kids do. The food was good. The pierogi was perfect. I'd made a full batch and there was barely any left. Bernard from the year before had passed away in January, quietly in his sleep. And I thought about him during the meal. I thought about how he'd had thirds of the pierogi and complimented it so seriously, like a man who knew what it meant to be fed well by someone who cared. After dinner, when the kids were doing dishes and the grandkids were in the common room and Ed was telling Stephen something about football that Stephen was clearly humoring, Dolores sat next to me and said, "You know what Harvey always said about family?" I said I didn't. "He said family is the people who know where to find you." She smiled at the room. I think he was right. I looked around at the people I'd chosen and the people who had chosen me back, at my children moving around in a space that was mine, not ours, helping because they wanted to and not because the weight of the past required it. And I thought about Carol's index card still propped against the flour canister in my kitchen, her sis curling the way they always had. I'd found the Easter card in Adrian's coat pocket the previous winter, left over from the year before, never sent. It said, "Happy Easter, Leonard. Hope this year is a good one," written and then put away. I don't know if she forgot or decided not to send it or meant to and ran out of time. It doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that when I handed it to her at the door when she arrived this Easter, she looked at it for a long moment and then looked at me and she said, "I'm going to do better." And I believed her. I'm 67 years old. I have bad knees and a decent pension and a 2-bedroom apartment with a balcony and tomatoes coming in strong this year in the community garden. I have my children in my life in a way that is real now, earned and honest, without the performance of it. I have Ed and his terrible chess and his terrible football opinions. I have Dolores for coffee. I have Lloyd who nods like a man who means everything he doesn't say. I have Carol's photo on the shelf and her handwriting on an index card and a scholarship in her name that awarded its first grant in April to a young woman named Becca who wants to teach 2nd grade and wrote in her application that she hoped to be the kind of teacher students remembered their era. Whole lives. I think Carol would have liked that very much. The lesson I wanted my children to learn was not a cruel one. It was the oldest one I know. Your love means nothing if it only shows up when it's convenient. Show up when it costs you something. That's when it counts. That's what your mother did every day of her life. That's what I'm asking from you now. They're learning, slowly the way grown people learn things, against their will, then all at once, then with something like gratitude. So am I.